A delicious Denzel, a sneaky, charismatic Paul Mescal, and a whole lot of Remember Maximus references towards the end. Today, we dissect the romp of a spectacle that is Gladiator 2. It's Movie Chumps, Luke Mayo and Corey Cook. All right, sir, now that you've had a few days to reflect, we saw this just a few days ago. What's your biggest takeaway from the sequel?
My biggest takeaway from the sequel is that it's good, not great. And I hate saying this, but I think it was completely unnecessary. To the point where there are some people saying, "Oh, it tarnishes the original." It does not do that in any shape or form, but it doesn't do anything in my mind to justify its existence. And it's kind of like I was talking to a couple friends about this situation. It's like when you're going to do a legacy sequel to what I consider a masterpiece, one of the great films of all time in Gladiator,
Agreed.
you're almost never going to get a Blade Runner 2049. It's not going to happen. But I feel like it still needs to at least justify its own existence, and I don't think it did. It's entertaining. I was entertained, as Maximus might say. But there's a lot of things about this film that I'm just like, yeah, I don't feel like that worked. But we'll definitely go into it. I would still say it's a strong 7 on 10. I think it's worth seeing. I even think it's worth seeing in the theater because it's visually stunning. But as a whole, I don't know if I ever need to see this movie again.
Hey, happy early Thanksgiving, by the way. By the
To
time
you as
we
well.
post this, it'll be post-Thanksgiving, probably.
Gobble gobble, MFers.
How many pounds are you going to gain this week?
Hopefully not a lot. I was
Such a
having
first world question, right?
right. I've got two. Well, I need to get the turkey in now before the tariffs go up. So, but I have like two. I have two. I've got to do one on Thursday and one Saturday. So,
Oh, rub it in. All right,
yeah.
coming up in headlines, Denzel, we were just talking about him, far from finished in the acting game. We're going to run down some of his future plans, which sound pretty exciting. Also, Andy Dufresne himself credits 2 reasons for why Shawshank Redemption became such a cult classic. But first, per tradition, we've got 5 questions.
Yes, indeed. It's my turn this week, sir. And as it is Thanksgiving week, and as it is a tradition for all Americans to feast, I don't have 5. I have 6 questions to pose to you tonight. The sixth is the let's call it the pumpkin pie question. It's the little dessert kick at the end. So my first question out of the box is, we're coming in hot. What's a hot take you have about religion, God, church, or any religious text?
Well, first of all, man, 6 questions. I am aroused. So a hot take on religion?
Hot take you've got on religion, God, churches, any religious text, whatever you want.
Hot take. Maybe just that the day-to-day actions of our lives aren't dictated as much as we like to think when we're watching Fox News, MSNBC all the time, in the average interactions, whether it's at a traffic stop or heck, even in church or like at Wegmans or at work. I don't think people's views come into play as much as we think. I know folks who identify on the right who, certainly don't practice what they preach. And then I know folks who maybe are on the left who are probably a little bit more spiritual than maybe they say they are. So I guess maybe that's kind of a hot take.
That's actually a very nuanced take, I think. My hot take is that, and listen, this hot take is not something
Is that all religions can go to hell?
No, it's not necessarily this hot take is not something that I think is unique that I came up with on my own. I think other people share this as well. I've heard other people share this as well. Is that I think of everything in the Bible, the 2 most important things are love God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And everything, all the other rules, the laws, everything from Exodus to Leviticus, all the way to Revelation, as far as I'm concerned, is fucking window dressing. You can hang everything on those 2 laws. If I'm following those 2 things, I feel like I'm going to be fine. That may be devastating for somebody to hear, and that's not to say that you can't get great wisdom out of the book of Mark or Proverbs, because Proverbs is fantastic, or Psalms, or wherever. But I think those 2 things are the most important things in the entire Bible. And if you're following those, everything else is windows dressing. Don't stress about it as much as you might want to.
You cut out for a quick second there, so I don't think you maybe you mentioned it. The fact that those are mentioned more than anything else is a good sign of like what's important.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's not like it's just mentioned once or twice.
Yeah. The
right?
two
It's like that respect and that love for the next person is littered throughout the good book.
as far as I'm concerned, all laws everything hangs on those two laws. Everything else is just secondary to me.
I'm
So,
with you there.
all right.
Way
Question
to
two.
start it out.
Hey, let's get it hot. Question number two: would you rather be a famous stage magician or a famous choreographer?
Choreographer. Yeah, that was always one of my pipe dreams as a kid. I used to love music videos and dancing. I loved the old MJ and Janet Jackson and New Edition, videos back in the 80s and 90s. And I always thought, man, what a cool job that would be to be able to choreograph some of that stuff. I think I probably gave up on it around 24, 25, where I'm like, all right, this probably isn't going to happen. It's a nice little fun pipe dream, right? Like playing outfield for the Yankees or point guard for the Celtics. At some point, you're like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. I don't know if I have the rhythm for all that or the mind to come up with that stuff. But I always was fascinated by that type, the movement, the rhythm, especially in music videos. I mean, even
Yep.
some of Fincher's early ones there.
I have
Just
so
like
much.
a lot of good choreography.
I have so much respect for that position and the ability to, in my mind, in some ways, conjure things out of thin air and marry music to dance like that. So yeah, I have the utmost respect for that position when it comes
And I
to
was
art.
thinking more from like a pop music standpoint,
Yeah,
I'm not even factoring in like the stage,
yeah.
like Broadway, like even just a number or two and, pick your favorite musical. Like, where do you even begin?
I don't even know. I don't even
Yeah,
know
with
how
the
you
music,
start
I guess.
about that. Oop, I guess for me, stage musician. Sorry, stage magician. Only because I'm such a ham, and I kind of like the spotlight on me. I was always in plays and things like that. So I say, like, here's the thing. I always kind of not obsessed, but like guys like Ricky Jay who can do all this stuff with the card tricks and the things, and they just have they're able to weave a story and tell about the history of magic and things like that. That always fascinated me. So if I was ever going to be a stage magician, that's the type of person I would want to be. All right.
Hugh
Question.
Jackman and what's the Prestige over
Oh
here?
yeah, him Christian Bale. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, question three. You sorry. Yeah, question three. What do you think the best thing about living in ancient Rome would be?
I mean, I feel terrible saying this, but some of the fights in the Colosseum
Hmm.
would be pretty wild. I think though, I've always been a fan of uh rhetoric, the spoken word, the written word, and I would love to see like a good debate, right? I would love to see some kind of senatorial uh back and forth. So maybe that would be, and then of course, second is probably a little bit of the bacchanalia that
Yeah,
we were privy to in Gladiator 2.
yeah. Bacchanalia orgies. That's my final answer. No, I actually would be interested in seeing like on a daily basis to see the discourse and the
Yes.
conversations and the heated debates, the spirited debates that often I'm sure it occurred in the Senate. And the
Which we got a nice taste of
we
in the
did get
first Gladiator.
we did for sure. So that does fascinate me. Especially also the art aspect of things and just I feel like there's
Yeah.
just raw creativity. Everything seems so. I'm trying to think. It's just primal, almost starting out. It's like almost a blue dwarf or whatever that start that blue star that just starts out and there's so much potential and energy coming from that. That just kind of excites me.
Good analogy.
Next question. You are gifted your ultimate sports car for your birthday. The catch is you can have it in any color but red. What color do you choose?
Sports car. So I think I've mentioned on the pod a few times, not a huge car guy per se, but I always liked a good classic Jeep. Not the
So
ones with the
that's not my
big like
question. Not the
right,
question.
but I'm getting there though.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, this is the long answer. So
Ah,
Jeep's always been like my kind of dream vehicle, I guess. But as I get older, I'm getting more into some of the sports cars, maybe after watching like um Ford versus
Ferrari.
Ferrari. Maybe like a Jaguar, like a forest green. Green's my favorite color. Maybe like a green Jaguar. I know it's not super sexy or anything like that. Some of those Maseratis look a little too ridiculous to me, but I'm going Jaguar, final answer. Or anything that Bond drove at some point.
Oh yeah, like the I'd probably go with the Aston Martin, and if I
Those
can't
are
get
cool.
If I can't get the red, I would get like an electric blue color, something that just kind of snaps and sizzles. Because if I'm gonna have a sports car, it's got to stand out too.
Yeah.
All right. Question 5. Would you rather live in a suburb of Tokyo for a year or a suburb of Seoul for a year? Korea, obviously.
Got to go Tokyo. I was just watching Tokyo Vice. I don't know as much about Seoul as maybe I thought I did, but I feel like Tokyo I've read a lot about over the years. A little bit more mystery for me with Tokyo, and I like to go where there's mystery. So give me a Tokyo suburb over Seoul.
I think I would go Tokyo too. It's the most populous city in the entire world. There's such a fusion, I think, of different kind of cultures. Like it's very obviously Japanese, but there's some American influences and whatnot. But I don't think I'd like to live in the city since it's so polluted. That's why I chose like a suburb in that instance. But yeah, I think I got to go with the suburb of Tokyo as well. Is that Tokyo Vice? Is a good show?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even halfway through the first season, but yeah, no, I think it's really good.
Okay,
It's
cool.
different too. Like it's a different world that they put you in, which is nice.
All right, check that out. All right, last question. You have to choose between living as a 10-foot tall Paul Bunyan for 10 years or Babe the Blue Ox for 1 year. Which do you choose?
I got to go Babe for 1 year. Let's get it over with. Because I don't see what kind of possible. I don't know though. 10. Yeah, I'm going with Babe. I got no reason other than like the horror is over after 1 year instead of 10. And if I'm 10 feet, I guess I'm thinking of a giant. I'd be gawked at. I would be laughed at. A lot of photos. You could probably get into a lot of like sporting events because you'd be like a celebrity, but you'd be a freaking goofball for a decade, right? Like you'd be considered like a freak show, even though there's nothing wrong with being 10 feet tall.
I would go
So
with being.
I'm going 10 feet. I'm
You,
switching it.
you're going to. I'm same way. I'm going
Yeah.
10 feet tall, Paul Bunyan. I couldn't stand being an ox for a year and eating grass and all that stuff. I don't care. 10. I mean, if I'm
Can
10
I
years,
talk as an ox?
no. It's just
Okay.
if plus I mean like I can capitalize on the celebrity, right? Who I mean
Yeah.
I will
You
find
gotta.
look at how much people have been able to monetize fucking everything nowadays. There's no way I couldn't make some serious bank and have a very large house for my very large head. So I'm going to go with Paul Bunyan.
Just the World Series tickets alone, you get seats at the Oscars. This podcast would absolutely blow up because it would be like, hey, we'd have to change the name of it,
Yeah, we'd
like
have
the
to.
Giant and the Knucklehead or whatever like that. So yeah,
Probably. And that is my 5 questions plus an extra pumpkin pie slice question.
an extra helping. It's making me hungry for Thursday. Good five, good sixer. And now it's time for headlines.
Ooh, let's go to press.
So far, so good for Timothy Chalamet. The first wave of reviews are in for his Bob Dylan portrayal.
Yeah, I'm not really surprised by this because I mean I was entranced from both of the trailers that we saw because he seemed to just disappear into the role in some way from what I saw. And the two ones that I want to read that were great was Scott Menzel said, Timothy Chalamet delivers the performance of the year in a complete unknown, a true tour de force where Chalamet is never seen. Chalamet's performance is not just about the voice and look, but rather all of the little nuances and mannerisms that he perfectly brings to life in his portrayal of Bob Dylan. Great supporting performances too from Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez and Edward Norton as Pete Seeger. And Variety's Clayton Davis said, Timothy Chalamet slides into Bob Dylan with an effortless yet focused determination in a complete unknown. Fearless in some hypnotic moments for me, it's Monica Barbaro and Elle Fanning that anchor the story of an elusive, mysterious man that remains in that sphere. James Mangold helms with confidence, with gorgeous sets and costumes. Much respect to one of the best to do it. And I think this is kind of, and this is going to have like an offhanded comment, and I don't mean this as an insult at all, but I think many people are considering this as a quote unquote comeback film for James Mangold after Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, had so many detractors. Obviously, you and I loved it. I loved it. I thought he did a great job
Comeback
with it.
film.
Yeah, I mean, because he got trashed a lot by people saying that he just destroyed Indy and this and that. I don't agree with that situation, but one of the things I love about James Mangold is he can flex between these different things. He can do these small personal tales, but he can also do something, and go and do something like Logan, which is small and intimate as well, but it's still in that superhero vein. But this is really compelling to me. I'm interested in this because of who's in it, who's directing it, and the subject matter. Because obviously he does not have the greatest voice in the world, but I think you'd be very hard pressed to find anyone to say that Bob Dylan is not in the top three, if not the number one lyricist of the 20th century.
Yeah, I feel like Dylan's music and a lot of those folk rock kind of icons at this point. That's one of my blind spots when it comes to music. I've always been kind of like either a Motown, R&B, hip hop guy, and I've kind of poo-pooed a lot of those that era. But as I've gotten older, I've grown to appreciate it. But Dylan, I've always respected his songwriting. Of course, I said it before, I wasn't a fan of his voice. But even like the trailer with Chalamet, I kind of threw it under the bus originally, but as I've seen the trailer more and more, I've kind of like come around to Chalamet in that role. So I'm looking forward to learning more about some of these characters, and I see it as a bridge to doing a deep dive on some of these albums too. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a neat little universe to explore for me, just as a music fan.
That's why I always, a lot of people for some reason like poo-poo biopic or musical biopics, or any type of biopic. But as you said, I kind of feel like it's a springboard into like
Yes.
like I did a deeper dive into Johnny Cash because of Walk the Line. I knew who he was, but I really started getting to his music at least for about 6 months after the film because it was interesting to me.
Josh Brolin, we love him. He's pissing off one legendary director while going to bat for another popular director in a major way. Super interesting headline here.
Yeah, so in recently, Brolin was in some conversations with first off with a Variety, where he's talking about Denis Villeneuve, who he got to work with obviously with several times with Sicario and also with Dune Part 1 and 2. And he said, if Denis Villeneuve does not get nominated this year, I'll quit acting. He's referring to Dune Part 2. Dune Part 2 was a better movie than the first one. When I watched it, it felt like my brain was broken apart. It's masterful, and Denis is one of our master filmmakers. If the Academy Awards have any meaning whatsoever, they will recognize him. I don't think there's any universe where Denis does not at least at the bare minimum get a nomination for Best Director.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
honestly, and I may be just caught up in the movie bubble, but I still feel like 7 8 months on, Dune 2 still has momentum, still has power going to this award season. Like I consistently see more people again and again and again, critics and people respect saying Dune 2 is still the best film I've seen this year.
Yeah.
And for me, it's still the case too, by a country mile. Like there to me, the closest thing has been The Wild Robot, but I still am waiting to see a film to me that's on that level of next level cinematic masterpiece, and I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I think Dune 2 for me far and away is number one. And then maybe Furiosa, Wild Robot I enjoyed. Um yeah, I think it's going to clean up. I really do. And I
I
think it's
hope so
just going to be
too.
one of those movies that even if it doesn't clean up in terms of actual awards, I think it's going to lead the momentum coming in, and it's going to be one of the most talked about and shown movies, if that makes sense, during the actual like lead up to the ceremony
Yeah,
and during the ceremony. Like that's going to be the focus. That's going to be like that's going to be the thing that's like causing all the jokes, and Conan's going to have a field day with it, and people are going to be talking about it.
I love the fact that Conan is hosting. That's kind of a semi
So
headline
pumped.
itself.
Yes.
That's a great pick, at least for my.
Uh,
I don't know how much the younger generation knows Conan much, but again, like the younger generation isn't really watching the Oscars anyway. But that's a completely different conversation. I will
Still
say
ticked off
this.
that he got screwed by the whole Leno
Oh,
situation. So, and I know his podcast is crushing, but this will be
mhm.
another opportunity to like put him up at the forefront.
Yeah, I agree as well. And one thing I will say is I have a feeling that because I had a feeling I still think it's an Oscar-worthy performance as Chalamet as Paul Atreides in this role. I think he's going to get nominated for A Complete Unknown instead. I have that feeling, but I still think we're going to see some other acting nominations for that, including Zendaya. Honestly, they're going to push her for supporting. She's not a supporting player in that movie, as far as I'm concerned. But I know how award shows work. But I still think this thing has momentum. The other side of the coin that uh, uh, Brolin was talking about, he was appearing on In Depth with Graham Bensinger. He was talking about, apparently he turned down a role in Avatar 2, and I'm not sure what the role is. He really didn't talk about what it was. But apparently James Cameron took that as a real personal slight and was incredibly pissed off that he offered him the part and he straight up turned it down. And he says 2 years on, he says, I understand it, because when you have something in your mind and you have a status and a power, you're used to people feeling really grateful that you're offering it to them. I don't know if that's the case with him because I don't know him well enough, but it was based on the project. It wasn't based on him. So it's funny how Brolin, I think he's turned down some major projects in the past. Like he turned down Lanterns. The Hal Jordan role was offered him and he said no. So it's, to me, at this point in his career, he's got enough money, he's got enough movies behind him. He can be a little bit more selective with the projects and who he wants to work with. And as much as I love James Cameron, the dude has a titanic ego, no pun intended. And the fact that he would take this as a personal slight is kind of bush league to me. You're almost a 70-year-old man. Fucking get over yourself, dude.
I think I'm a nerd and forever a Josh Brolin fan for no other reason than he was Bran in Goonies, and he's one of those guys you kind of follow,
Yeah.
right? He's like the older brother then, and he's like the guy you kind of always look up to in the acting world. I've always enjoyed his choices, and it's just fun to see his kind of weathered face up on the screen now
Yes.
too, right?
And as our friend Corey K likes to say, he's a child actor that came through the fire on the other side and ended up being
Yeah.
successful, as an adult actor, which is something that you have to appreciate and you have to respect, considering that a lot of times that doesn't happen for childhood actors, and very unfortunate circumstances arise.
He's a classic guy
Oh
actor,
yeah.
right? It's nice to
He's
kind
a
of have a few of
he
those once in a while.
he was the perfect Gurney Halleck. If you've ever read the novel or know the description of the character, how gritty and grizzled and gruff and kind of like a curmudgeon he can be, perfect casting. I loved it.
Shout out to him and Sicario as well.
Hmm.
Both of those. Third headline, Robert Pattinson and Chris Nolan teaming up again. Worked out well last time they got together. We're also learning about, not too long ago, we found out about another actor who Chris Nolan, it looks like, will be working with for the first time.
Yes. So Robert Pattinson, according to the Hollywood Reporter, is reteaming with the Oppenheimer director for his role in his next film. Still no title, and actually still no description. Apparently it's been reported now that the rumors about the vampire film and also about the futuristic helicopter thing are also bullshit. So we don't know exactly what it is that he's planning to do, but whatever he's cooking, we're down for.
Yeah,
And
we're eating it.
also, as you said, for the first time ever, the great, the talented, the amazing, the Oscar-winning actress Charlize Theron
My
is
second wife.
your second wife is going to be starring in the film as well. This is a hell of a cast he's stacking up, and it just goes to show you what an amazing director he is and the type of talent, type of energy that he brings to things, that people just flock to him, that they just
Yeah,
want to work with him.
him and Villeneuve. I mean, I imagine an actor or an actress getting a script and not even reading it, going, "Who is it from?" Yeah, I'm in, but
Man,
yeah, I might as well read it anyway.
I'm playing a Daisy. Fine.
Denzel, far from finished. He's going to be the headline this entire podcast, it seems like. He's got a pair of sequels in the works, so this doesn't look like a case of it's Denzel a la, Ali, late 70s, early 80s, where we're like, hey, man, even De Niro, where it's like, look, it might be time to call it quits. I think Denzel's got still a handful of almost classics in the works here.
Yeah, this was surprising to me. Granted, I haven't seen any of the Equalizer films at all. I hear they're really good, but
Oh, they're dynamite.
they're good? Okay, I'll have to check them out. And I thought actually the third one was gonna be it, but apparently, according to Esquire, Fuqua is down, and apparently they're going to be doing 4 and 5. He said to Esquire, "I told them I would do another Equalizer, and we're doing 4 and 5." More people are happy about that. People love those daggone Equalizers. But I've come to realize that the Equalizer films are for me too, because they're for the people. They want me to go get the bad guys. We can't get them, so you go get them. And I say, okay, I'll get them. Just wait right here. I'll be right back. That is so sounds like a thing Denzel would say.
Yeah, they're just fun. They're popcorn fun. There's a bit of that John Wick, like he's gonna whoop some ass.
Yep.
So yeah, they're a blast. I remember watching a few episodes of the show way back in the day. I remember my grandma watching it, but this is a totally different character. So yeah, you gotta give these things a look-see. Shawshank Redemption would have eventually found its audience, of course. Regardless, Tim Robbins is giving credit for the film's popularity to two specific sources. Super interesting.
And honestly, Luke, when I read this, I was not it. I was happy to read this because of the fact that Tim Robbins' contention about the Shawshank Redemption is something that you and I have talked about multiple times on this podcast as a reason why it endures. And he said in an interview, he said, "We're at 30 years now on from Shawshank Redemption. When it came out, it got good reviews. It got nominated for Academy Awards, but nobody saw it. It was VHS and Ted Turner playing it on his television channel, Turner Classic Movies, that changed that." And that's absolutely correct because every time you turned around on TCM or TNT or TBS, that fucking thing was always playing.
It's like Phil Collins on every adult contemporary radio station in the 80s and 90s. It's Shawshank's always on. Oh, it's not on? Wait a couple hours. Yeah, we talked about it. It's word of mouth was huge for that film. I mean, the marketing was like impossible. Everybody told a friend who told a friend who told a friend. Good on Dufresne. Or excuse me, Tim Robbins.
Yes.
These celebrity lookalike contests are the thing now. Chalamet had one and he showed up. So did Glenn Powell. But the Twister star did a little something different when he crashed his own contest recently.
Yeah. Yeah, so this was interesting because there was a Glenn Powell lookalike contest in Austin, Texas.
That's weird to me because he's very distinct looking, even though he has like that alpha male good look. Where Chalamet, a lot of those lookalikes, they kind of had that like hair. But Powell, it's not really a hair thing. Like his face is got its own. It's almost got like a small beady eyes, small mouth. I don't know.
So this is interesting because who won was a physician's assistant named Maxwell Bronstein, and he won $5 whole, a cowboy hat, free queso from Torchy's Tacos, and a special FaceTime message from Powell, because Powell is currently filming Edgar Wright's The Running Man in Europe. And he did a FaceTime, and this is what he said. And this is hilarious. "Welcome to the Justin Hartley lookalike contest." He joked. "In all seriousness, I've assembled you here today for an important mission. I want to pull off a heist, and we don't need masks because we all have the same face. It's the perfect crime. They can't get all of us because we are one, a criminal enterprise." So, and he said, "You may know that my parents make a cameo in every movie I make, but today the winner of the Glenn Powell lookalike contest wins their parents or any family member of their choice a cameo in my next movie. I am completely serious." That's pretty cool. And honestly, the more and more, first of all,
Look at the hype behind that.
Yes, that's a great hype. Glenn Powell is so charismatic. The more interviews and stuff you see, he just seems like such a likable dude. And honestly, he's the heir apparent to Tom Cruise. Like Tom Cruise is totally being his mentor in this case and showing him how to be a Hollywood movie star. I 1000% believe that.
Yeah, he 100% feels like a Hollywood movie star. He just has that kind of look. Like you see this guy and you're like, oh my, he's almost stereotypically Hollywood movie star. So it's going to be curious to see what he does with that, especially if he goes kind of more of that quirky Brad Pitt route where we saw Pitt take pretty early in his career. I'm curious to see like where he goes with his celebrity so far. Have you seen, speaking of Pitt, have you seen Wolves with him and George Clooney?
I have not watched it. I can watch it because we have Apple TV Plus, but I have not watched it yet.
Yeah, what's interesting is I guess we were going to get a sequel, but Apple apparently screwed the pooch, to quote Stand By Me and Stephen King. And it looks like now we might not get one. I haven't even seen it yet, but it looked like it could have been good.
Yeah, apparently, like there was when the film initially released, there was a complete announcement. Hey, there's going to be a sequel. John Watts, who is the writer and director, he's going to be back on board to do this. He quickly shot that down and said that's not going to happen. And there was a big kind of pissing contest about what went wrong, what's going on, whose fault was that. Well, it turns out it's kind of Apple who's the assholes. It turns out it was Apple's decision to pivot the movie to a limited theatrical release 1 week early before its streaming bow, and that was the main culprit. According to John Watts, this is what he said: "I wasn't even told about it, the pivot to streaming, until less than a week before they announced it to the world. I was completely shocked and asked them to please not include the news that I was writing a sequel. They ignored my request and announced it in their press release anyway, seemingly to create a positive spin to their streaming pivot. And so I quietly returned the money they gave me for the sequel. I didn't want to talk about it because I was proud of the film and didn't want to generate any unnecessary negative press. I loved working with Brad and George and would happily do it again. But the truth is that Apple didn't cancel the Wolf sequel. I did, because I no longer trusted them as a creative partner." My initial thoughts were a couple things. One, good for him. Great that he had the kind of artistic integrity to say, "Go screw yourself." Secondly, have we learned nothing from the Christopher Nolan WB experience with Tenet? Like, what? Why? What are you doing to people like this? This is the stuff that's going to kill the theatrical experience. Lying is not going to help your cause, man.
It's tough with the internet. We're learning all about these like behind the scenes type stories. Not that we wouldn't get these back in the day. You'd get them if you did deep dive, if you looked deep into Entertainment Weekly, of course, one of our favorites, Premiere Magazine. But now when you hear these behind the scenes stories, it really gets our blood boiling. Like, we've talked about
Yeah.
this a lot, especially with like even Zaslav, who freaking I feel like gives me almost coronary once a month. You know, 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have batted an eye about his bullshit, but now it's like we have to read about it all the time. And that's kind of the case here, I feel like.
Well, I mean, it's sadly becoming, the standard in the business. I wrote my Megalopolis review today, and at the
Which was
end,
a riot, by the way, to
th-
read.
thank you. If and what I said at the end uh, pertained in a lot of ways to Hollywood, because I said, listen, I don't like hating on a film and disparaging a film and despising a film, because I get the fact that right now that it's difficult to make any movie in Hollywood because it's being run by a bunch of venture capitalist anti-art troglodytes who think that John Ford is the CEO of a car company and Akira Kurosawa created Godzilla. They're morons. So I get it. And this is just a sad state of affairs that I really, really hope changes someday.
You ready to talk Gladiator 2, good sir?
I'm ready, sir. Let's rock it.
We're going to start out with a little fun
Okay.
and start with the CGI baboons and sharks first. Campy and ridiculous for me, but the way I look at it is like, hey, Ridley Scott doing something different at the age of 117. Let's start with the animals in this one. The baboons come on screen, especially that one that was fighting. These should have been in Wicked. The
Right.
freaking baboons. Oh, whoop.
I'm
There we
sorry. I
go.
went mute there for a second, but yeah, flying monkeys is it. Listen, I'll say this. It was a really cool concept to
Yes.
have Lucius, in this case, or Hanno, as his name, his assumed name is, fight animals, because honestly, that was a thing that happened back in gladiatorial days. They'd fight baboons and lions and tigers and all sorts of stuff. So the concept was cool, and the fight itself was actually pretty good. The problem was that the baboons looked ridiculous. They looked like terrible CGI monkeys. So
It
you
looked
wish
like
that,
Phantom Menace when they're
yeah,
showing like Boss NASA and some of that stuff.
yeah, it's just
Mm.
was not good. I
We got to
actually
get a Boss NASA impression in here.
He's a boss ass. No, I he's so bum bad. No, uh, I actually thought the rhino looked fine, but
Yes, I was cool with that. That's why I didn't mention it.
I
Yes.
thought the rhino, and actually I thought that was pretty cool. Him charging the characters in
Him
that one.
throwing up the sand to blind him
Yeah,
for a moment. Yeah, that was
brilliant
sweet.
idea. And like, uh, Hanno, or Lucius in this case, is obviously that thinking man's warrior for obvious reasons, even being raised in Rome and whatnot. But yeah, the baboons, it looked ridiculous. The sharks, that like not the sharks, the fins looked awful. The fins that poked above, because listen, the Colosseum would do crazy shit like that. They would reenact sea battles and put all kinds of different menagerie of animals in there and shit like that. But the fins, they looked like the fake fin that those two kids used in Jaws, later in the film, to try to trick everyone that there was a shark on the beach. I saw that and I was like, "Ugh." And I
The
think
thing for
what
me is all I could think about was like, all right, it's somebody had to go to the freaking
prove it.
Mediterranean Sea or somewhere off the coast of Africa, catch these what looked to be at least like 5 or 6 sharks,
Yep.
and then somehow get them into the Colosseum. That's all I kept thinking about. It took me out of it for a moment there. I mean, the concept was neat because you knew whoever was going overboard was getting eat up, which was pretty much the case. And at first you thought, Lucius and whoever and some of his crew were gonna like maybe fall over, and then somebody pulls him back up on board. But yeah, that completely took me out of it. But I do respect the swing for
Yes.
Ridley Scott, who gives 0 Fs at this point, I gotta
Oh yeah,
think.
he gives he has a field of fucks that is completely empty and has been for about 2 decades at this point. But like, yeah, I think what you said, I completely agree with, Luke, which is I respect the effort, I respect the swing. It's a bold move. It's just not executed well because the special effects don't look it. And what heightens how it is, what heightens the fact that it doesn't look well and it doesn't look polished, is the fact that so much of the other practical effects in terms of costumes, uh, giant sets, everything is so spectacular in this movie, because I've got to give credit where it's due. You feel like you are thrust back into ancient Rome. Everything, everything
Even
looks
from
awesome.
that opening scene, from the opening
Yes,
attack from Rome's army there.
the
I mean,
opening.
I'm in.
Yeah,
I'm right in. It was classic escapism
I
at
was
that point.
absolutely, yes, total escapism. I was absolutely invested from the start. Wished it would have sustained the momentum of that opening scene, which is incredible war value. But I really I got to give credit where it's due. The costume, the set design, the authenticity of the film itself really shone through, and I would be shocked if it doesn't get some Oscar nominations in those categories when it comes time, in January, for those to be announced.
I don't want to wait too long to not talk about Denzel here. So one of the big storylines is how swell of a performance pretty much Denzel brings here. He brought that something to every scene, which I think was delightful. I think I called it delicious at the beginning of the pod, and that was kind of the case. Even like the cutaways, even when he wasn't saying anything, that's the
Mhm.
true sign of a movie star, which we've talked about before. Where I like the scenes where Lucius is fighting or something crazy's happening in the Coliseum or one of those arenas, and it just kind of cuts to Denzel, and he's almost like, "Oh, okay." Well, this is interesting. Him watching, smiling as a spectator. But I didn't see, and this is going to sound like I'm hating. I'm not. I love Denzel. I didn't see anything that was necessarily out of the ordinary to warrant like Oscar talk here. I mean, if he gets one for this, cool. If he gets nominated, cool. I'll never hate on a Denzel performance. But it's not like he doesn't do this in every freaking movie. I wonder if maybe he brought almost that color in every way you want to say, physically, the look, the fact that he was one of the only African Americans in the film. Maybe it's because he doesn't act as stoic and he's more, you know, verbally jousting and colorful with his language. But yeah, I don't know. It's not like it was this Denzel's absolutely cooking on all three. I mean, it's Denzel. Like it's what we expect.
If he gets an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor over Javier Bardem or Austin Butler from Dune 2, I'm going to riot, because
Yeah, agreed.
I hate to say this, but I think this is one of the weakest acting performances of Denzel's career. I really, I was going into this expecting, oh, he's gonna cook, he's gonna be great, because I'd been hearing so many good things about it, and I thought, aside from the looks that he can give, because he can convey everything with just upturned lip, or an intense stare, which is, he's still got that magnetism.
Right.
Other than that, it felt like Denzel being thrown into an ancient Roman story.
Absolutely.
Some of the language and the lines he had to say felt extremely overwrought, and he was delivering them in like 1990s Denzel fashion,
Right,
and
right.
he wasn't, and eventually he turns out to be, in this case, the villain, because he's trying to do an overthrow of the Roman government in general, and trying to bring about the death of the emperors, and this and in that aspect as well. But I never really felt any sense of vindictiveness from him, or being this master manipulator that I kind of expected him to be. There were some interesting moments that I was like, that part where he talks to Lung, it's like, "I own your house now. Your house is mine." I thought that was kind of an interesting. I kind of took a step back and was like, "Whoa, okay, this is an intimidating situation." But there, it just felt. I can't help but say this. I felt that maybe he was the wrong actor to play this role, because what he brought to this was so anachronistic, and he has so much baggage behind him of being Denzel in some ways,
That's the
that
thing.
I
Yeah.
think it overall hurt the film. And as somebody who has a tremendous amount of respect for Denzel Washington, I think he's one of the top 5 actors of all time in the history of cinema. I was severely disappointed with this performance, and it didn't do it for me.
It was almost he was almost so magnetic that I think at times it made Paul Mescal and Pedro Pascal a little more almost like not milk toast, because I don't want to use that word, even though I just did. But I'd almost robbed them of some of their agency in a way.
I can see where you're coming from on that, but I question your stance that Denzel's performance was magnetic or charismatic, because it felt that way occasionally, but I never thought it really overwhelmed anybody else's performance. In fact, if anything, I came away from this performance having even more respect for Paul Mescal, because you are stepping into
He was able to go toe to toe
yeah,
pretty much.
he's goes toe to toe with anybody in this. I really felt I was invested in his journey. The fact of, his wife getting, he's sent away by his mother when he's young, seemingly abandoned. He has to grow up in a completely foreign land, be a self-made man. He's somewhat of a farmer. He has a wife. He's just trying to live his life, right? He says, "I want a wife and kids, and just be stable at home, and no Rome comes knocking at the door." But he has this rage and this viciousness and this that but there's definitely some. He's not a Maximus 2.0 in my
No,
mind.
no.
There's definitely some differences there, because of the fact that he still remembers there's some amazing scenes between him, and in this case, in Connie Nielsen's Lucilla, like at first, especially when they first confront each other, and she's, "I know you're Lucius, or my son." He's like, "I don't know who you think I am, but whoever you think I might be, that boy has been dead for years." And when he screamed for her to get out of the cell, I was kind of like, I was vision I was shaken. I was kind of taken aback. I was like, "Whoa, this guy has got the juice. He's got the gravitas." And of course, the fight scenes and everything, he really committed to the role that
How about
I
his voice, though? That's the
yeah.
thing that struck me about Paul Mescal here was the overall voice. Like he
Mhm,
has a certain command when he talks. I don't think he has the same like Russell Crowe. I mean, that's one of the best performances I've ever seen anywhere. I mean,
mhm,
to see an actor just embody that kind of like he walks in and he's got that natural charisma. And I get that like he's supposed to be, he's a general and he's
mhm.
coming from a different background. So there's different character baggage here. But what struck me about Mescal was, and we both like him for different movies in the past. For me, it's After Sun. For you, I know you mentioned the movie that you saw earlier this year, which
All
you
of Us
recommended.
Strangers. Highly recommend that.
Yeah, so we come to this with some Paul Mescal, with some fandom there. But his delivery with some of these lines, I was just like, oh man, this is a nice little movie star here. Whereas Russell Crowe almost doesn't have to say anything, just the way he carried himself. I think with Mescal, maybe it's just the way Ridley Scott framed it. It's his voice and that command and that language that really just jumped off the page, so to speak, for me.
Yeah, I think he also has that Roman look to him. He feels
Yes.
like a guy who could just step right out of the Roman Empire and then
Yeah.
be swinging and being a gladiator and swinging a sword as a gladiator. And I respected that. I fully bought him in the character of Hanno, who eventually is revealed to be Lucius. And he seems like the type of guy who could command. He everyone some of the speeches that were made could sometimes come off as overwrought, but I think
Yeah.
he bought into them and he did the best he could with them. And I felt the the connection between his men and the people that wanted to follow him. It's not as strong or as uh, inculcated, so to speak, as what you saw with Maximus and his men, in terms of being somebody who could like command an army just by finding out that the person was still alive. But it's still a strong performance that you really buy. Again, one of the reasons I did like this movie overall is because I bought into him as a character. I was invested in his story, even if at times it felt a little like it was, uh, you know, not parodying something, but mimicking some of the storylines that we saw from the original Gladiator.
Yeah, a ton of the same beats here.
Yeah, but
A
again,
ton of the same beats.
you almost feel some ways that Macronus, Denzel Washington's character is supposed to be somewhat like Proximo, even though they're two very different characters for sure. And we're gonna, that's the thing that kind of was a little frustrating to me, is that in some ways it felt like we're recreating what we got with the film in 2000. It's like, why are we trying to do a cheap facsimile of something like that? And as I said at the beginning of at the outset of this podcast, if you're going to do a legacy sequel to something that's been gone for 2 decades, you got to have a compelling reason to go back and revisit that world and bring us something new. And I don't know if we got anything necessarily new from this film. And
Right.
you're not going to get a Blade Runner 2049. That is something to me is that's in a lightning bolt. It's a masterpiece that arguably in my mind is better than the first, and at the very very least makes the first film better. That is definitely not the case with this film. I feel this is a question I have for you. One of the reasons that I think I love Gladiator so much is because of the tremendous heart it has behind it. There is a pathos, a connection to the human condition that you get with that film, even though we don't have any connection or experience of being a gladiator from 2,000 years ago. And I felt that that was just severely missing from Gladiator 2.
Totally agree. I think it goes back to the overall mission of that first film, which is like, here's a guy who gets screwed over, right? There's like this power play that Maximus is trying to avoid, essentially, right? The ego is gone. He's just trying to do what he feels is right.
He just
He
wants to go
loses his
home.
wife and child, right? In the process, he gets screwed over like 3 different ways. And then it's like, okay, let's follow him to make the big comeback. How is he going to get his revenge? How is he going to, oh, he's got to go through all these different battles. So right away, we feel the heartache and the, just him trying to get back to his wife and child. Like, we are with him that whole time, right? We think maybe he's going to beat some of the Praetorian Guard back to his like farm in
Mhm.
time. We
We're
don't know
hoping
until
that.
in real time. And then all of a sudden they're hanging, right? And he comes over and he's like, kissing their feet as they hang. I mean, it's like,
You,
it's
we,
brutal. And that music, I mean, it's just everything about it. It's like classic, big Hollywood themes, Hollywood films. I mean, right away, it crushes you. And that's like
yep.
45 minutes into the damn thing, because
Hmm.
you get all the different, you get the opening, battle with the Germanic tribes there. With this one, when Paul Mescal's wife gets killed, I hate to say it, but it was just kind of like, okay. We were with her which is interesting filmmaking, because we actually get more screen time with her than we did with Maximus's wife, who just gets a couple like flashback scenes in
Yeah.
slow-mo, and yet we feel, maybe that's a credit to Russell Crowe, I don't know, maybe just the editing, we feel that loss there. So right away, that's catapulting us through this film, that first film. In this one, you don't feel that. You just
No.
don't. Like, it sucks, but you're just kind of like this. And it's one of those movies too where there's so much baggage, because coming in, that it's Lucius, right? You know some stuff about Denzel coming in, Pedro Pascal's character, Lucilla, who's coming back, of course, for a second film, and Connie Nielsen was terrific again, fun to watch, beautiful, has that regalness to her.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you just don't have that same heart, that same singular mission, I think, with this one. And I actually like the fact that you get a buffet of characters here, because I knew coming in I wasn't going to get that big emotional wallop as they got with the first one. I knew it wasn't going to be I'm living vicariously through Maximus. In this one, you're kind of like jumping all over the place. You're not necessarily living vicariously through Lucius in a way. You're just almost watching as a spectator, because you're seeing the twin tyrants. You're seeing what Denzel's kind of cooking. What's General Acacius up to? Are we supposed to like him at first? You almost aren't sure right away. Even Denzel, you're not sure if you like the guy.
I think that you made an excellent point, Luke, and I think it strikes to the heart of the main difference, as you were saying, between Gladiator 1 and Gladiator 2, which is that Gladiator 1 is very much the vein of Maximus's story. We are
Right.
connected to him throughout, even if there's times that we cut across to, Commodus or anything that's going on. The through line is the story and investment that you have from Maximus. You reference that scene where he actually finds his wife and son. The screen pans up and it's just them burnt and hanging from a cross, and he's kissing their feet. And that is just such an emotionally devastating scene that breaks us as the audience. And there's almost like a desire to try to recreate that at the beginning here with Hanno and his wife Arishat. Arishat, as you said, gets more screen time. She actually gets a couple lines, but I didn't
A
feel
couple
the loss.
kills, I think.
Yeah, I didn't feel the loss. And then
Yeah.
to build off of what you said before too, which I really appreciated what you talked about, how Gladiator 2 is almost, it's almost like an assembly situation where we're split into four different stories. We've got Hanno or Lucius's story. We've got General Acacius in this case. We've got the two emperors. We've got Macrinus. So it's almost split. There's the Maximus in the first film is the bleed in his story is the beating heart of that movie, and I feel like that's just kind of lost in the shuffle with this film, and we're trying to make up for it with epic battle scenes and fights and and great sets and costumes and sound design and things of that nature, and it's just it's not that.
What it feels like to me is when we watched this Tinseltown opening night, or do we see that's
uh
opening night,
we
right?
well yeah the technically the night before, it was a Thursday night preview, but yeah.
So weird how it says opening Fridays, but it's like, okay, but it's Thursday.
Right.
It's almost like Ridley Scott had so much fun after making that first one. Loved all the delicious characters that propped up. One of our favorites, Oliver Reed, in his final role
Yep.
playing Proximo, who was just so much fun, and all the backstories behind him and him
So
dying
many
during the making of it, and they had
great
to like
giraffes.
figure it out. What you liking, Spaniel?
Like,
Girl,
you're
boy?
good Spaniard, but you're not that good. Do you ever hear? Have you seen that video with Bill Hader talking to a couple actors? I forget. One of them is who's the um, shoot? Who's the actor in Sideways? Uh,
Paul
Paul Giamatti.
Giamatti?
He's talking to Paul Giamatti and another actor, and he's talking about. It's like, if he's with this audience, and he's like, "Have you guys ever heard of Oliver Reed?" And it's like, "Oh yeah," and it's like, great actor. He's like, "I saw this clip once that was hysterical because he talked about the difference between being theater and film." Have you seen this video at all?
No.
And he's like, and he does this. Bill Hader is great with impressions, and he does this
Yeah.
impression. He's like, "So when you're in the theater and your arm is hurt, and someone grabs you, you need to be very enthusiastic and be like, ah!" He's like, "But if you're in a movie, you need to play it down and be like, ooh." Like, it's hilarious. Check it out if you want to find that video. But yeah,
That's an early recommendation. In Proximo, the backstory and all things Oliver Reed, him
how he
arm
died,
wrestling and
it's
sailors and
crazy.
shit. Yeah, it's absolutely
Go
crazy. So
listen
it's
to our
almost like,
go
oh,
listen
go
to our
ahead.
Gladiator podcast where we did in
Yeah.
fact talk about it.
So it's almost like he's like, look, I want to get a bunch of good actors back together, some interesting characters. Just
Mhm.
let me throw them in the stew and let them cook. But
Yep.
in the process, he loses what's at the heart of the original Gladiator. And maybe that's his goal. Maybe
Mhm.
it's not so much a case of like, hey, I want to mimic the magic of Gladiator. Maybe it's more, I'm going to return to Rome. I'm going to bring you along with me, but I'm going to bring you a whole bunch of new characters with some different plots and some different aims. And let's just kind of see what happens. And in many ways, the movie furthers what we never got in the original, where, you know, Maximus pretty much sends up the bat signal to his men. His men never really get to come to rescue him, even
Mhm.
though when you watch it, you get so wrapped up. You're like, oh, I can't wait to see what happens here. Let's see
Yep.
how Commodus, reacts to this, right? We can't wait to see his reaction. It's like, oh, yeah, that's right. We never get to that point. This is kind of the case of like, no, they actually get to that point. Lucius puts out the clarion call. The other Cassius's men come to the rescue, and it actually kind of works out. So
And
yeah,
yet,
it's just a different. He's it's like we're I see a lot of reviews, and we've done the same thing. We're kind of ragging on the fact that it's not the original, but at the same time, there's no way he's going for that same
it's a I
magic.
yeah, and yet, to your point, and I liked how you framed that, where we actually get what we thought we were going to get at the end of Gladiator,
Yeah,
with his men showing up, and the fact that his men don't show up, and that Maximus dies in the way he does makes his demise all that more impactful. And especially since the fact that Commodus gets killed, and the resulting, it's such a huge emotional impact. You really feel that, and you feel the consequences, and then that beautiful moment where Jamon Hanchu is saying, "I will see you again, but not yet, not yet." That whole thing, and then you compare it to Lucius's rousing speech at the end, where it's like, "Can we stop this garbage and just unite as a people of Rome?" It pales in comparison to
right.
the ending
Yeah,
of the first Gladiator. That it felt clunky, and
yeah.
it just felt,
That's the best way to put
ugh,
it.
it
And there's
just
a
it.
lot of that, the storytelling throughout the whole movie, even when they're showing some of those flashbacks where it's supposed to be Lucius,
Mhm.
young Lucius as a kid. I think the first flashback, there's like three or four, and at least two of them, at least one for sure, almost comes out of nowhere to the point where I could forgive you if you didn't realize that it was a flashback. And I think that was kind of poor storytelling, um,
I
to a
I
point.
I hate to say this, but I think that uh, Ridley's got to hook up with somebody else other than David Scarpa, because if you look at his credits, it's The
Yeah.
Last Castle, The Day the Earth Stood Still, All the Money in the World, Napoleon, and Gladiator 2. And I'm sorry, none of them are really great.
Nope.
In any way, shape, or form, none of them stand out. I mean, the Gladiator 1 had three different screenwriters to it, which sometimes I feel like, if there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it can derail a script for a film. Didn't happen with that situation, but I was not a fan of what David Scarpa had cooking up, because so many things felt clunky and strange. I mean, here's the thing too that we've got to talk about. After the character of Joseph Quinn's Emperor Gata, which, by the way, what a year for Joseph Quinn. I'm
Yeah.
loving the fact that I mean, you've got to see, if you haven't seen it already, Quiet Place Day One. It's fantastic. Obviously, he's great in Stranger Things. He's got, what is it coming out? He's got uh, um, Fantastic Four coming out, and he's done he's excellent in this role as Emperor Gata, who
He's
is.
quickly becoming the guy where you say, "Oh, I like this guy."
Yeah, oh, that guy. He's the that guy person, which I'm glad he's getting his flowers. But after he is summarily killed and murdered by Emperor Caracalla, played by Fred Hitchinger, who is an it's an that's an unhinged performance from the
Yes.
guy who had a syphilitic brain. But once Amber Gata is killed, the movie really kind of loses its momentum. It
Yeah.
really kind of goes downhill, and it just kind of becomes this weird maneuvering by Macronus, and suddenly, w- w- the who is it, Emperor Caracalla's monkey is somehow in charge in some ways,
Forgot
and I'm
about the
like,
monkey.
and
Yeah.
Dundas, I think, and I'm like, what? I'm watching some of this things, going, what is happening here? It just
I
kind of.
forgot all about that monkey. How did we wait this long? Did Ridley Scott go to the zoo before he wrote this movie?
I guess so. Maybe that was his inspiration, but yeah, Dundas, I think, is the monkey's name, and somehow he becomes, I forget what the term is for it. as a high Roman citizen. But yeah, then the movie just kind of devolves from there. It's almost like they didn't know what to do once General Acacius gets killed in the Colosseum and
That's a
once
great
Emperor,
point.
and it doesn't end. It ends on a pretty flat note, in my mind, especially with Lucius going back to the Colosseum and saying, "Father, speak to me." And that's another thing I want to talk about. What do you feel about the thoughts finding out that the big reveal that Lucius is in fact Maximus's son?
Surprised I didn't. First of all, I'm surprised I didn't hear about that coming in. Not that there was a ton of spoilers here, but there was enough to. I had heard enough about it to, not be super surprised as going through this movie. I would say the big twists are that and Denzel almost being more, Machiavellian and kind of evil than and plotting than we thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what's weird about this, and I don't know if we discussed it when we did the first podcast, but I thought that there was clear signs that it could be Maximus's son,
We had
that they
talked about
had
it.
like there's that weird chemistry between, clearly that's what they were trying to show, is that Maximus and, is it Lucilla,
Lucilla. Yep.
at some point must have had some kind of either infatuation with each other, or was it like some kind of teenage love, and maybe that one of those couples that
They were
like
involved.
could have been, you know what I mean? But they hinted at in the first one that maybe that could be their child, or it could be her and Commodus's incestuous child, right? That was kind of like the two options, but they
Right.
don't really specify. But there was enough there to say, okay, it definitely could be. But I was listening to, and I love their podcast, Sean Fennessy and the crew, Chris Ryan and them over on the Big Picture under the Ringer umbrella. And they were all like absolutely shocked that, oh my gosh, what a big, like, they almost treated it as if it was like, well, I guess let's just make Rey Palpatine's
Ah,
granddaughter or whatever, like this complete bullshit 180. Or no, in my opinion, no, there's a shitload of clues in that first one. I mean,
especially I'm saying my son is also almost 8. You feel like the relationship ended at about the time that she got married and he decided to get married
yeah,
too. And
yeah,
then
like maybe they had a romance right before Maximus meets his beau,
as soon as they talked about how Lucius Verus, Lucius's father, was not into women in Gladiator 2, I knew that they were going to say Maximus is his son. Now, I don't necessarily think it is a giant wet fart of a reveal like
No, not at all.
Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter.
Right.
Because like you said, I feel like there are some signs and inclinations. I don't. At the same time, I don't think it 100% works either.
Works, right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, to
but
me, it's almost like it doesn't really matter too much, other than the fact that it's, to me, the big emotional pull, if anything, isn't so much Lucius losing his wife. It's almost him almost reconnecting with his mother.
mhm.
And I feel like they could have played that maybe a little bit different, where there's a deeper pull
They should
emotionally.
have leaned into that more. It almost would have been better if Lucius didn't have a wife at all, and that the
Yeah. And he
through line would have been focused on his relationship with his mother and reconnecting with his mother. Because
and
I
he wasn't
feel
so
like
hostile towards her at
yes,
first.
or at least that there was an evolution of that. Because I feel like if that would have been the more focal point, when Lucilla actually gets murdered by Macrinus with an arrow to the chest, I feel like the I feel like we should as the audience have felt that death much more than we did.
Yeah.
We should have been in the same mindset as Lucius of how much, hey, I just got my mom back and now I've lost her again. It
It
should have
just
had the
felt like an
same
average
emotional.
death.
Yes, exactly. It should have had the same emotional upheaval that we had in the first film when Maximus loses his wife and son, and it didn't. And again, that comes back to my overall arching criticism of this film is that it does not have the heart that I was looking for.
Yeah, what I enjoyed about it probably most of all was the fact that I didn't come in expecting a whole lot of her. I think I saw it as like, okay, this is going to be a spectacle of Ridley returning to, a sandbox that he enjoyed the first time, and we all did. So I kind of came in with like what's he going to do different here? How am it's a cliche. Are you not entertained? Entertain me, do something a little bit different. And, we got that with a lot of the different things I mentioned. The animals and shit, which was a little weird. Some new set pieces, which were interesting. Two instances with boats. You get the reenactment in the Colosseum, but then you get the one of the opening scene
which
where
is
all those Roman
fantastic.
ships are just attacked. Yeah, that was fun, and they didn't like overextend it. It wasn't like this half-hour long battle. It seemed like it was like that perfect length. And then you get all the plotting and oh shit, Denzel's like really because there was a time there in the film where you're not really sure if at some point Lucius and Macrinus are going to team up, like they're going to kind of be
Yeah,
the thing. There's a
the
point there where you're not
liberators of
sure.
Rome, right?
Yeah, or Lucius and Acacius.
Yeah,
Acacia or Acacius? Good grief, these freaking
Cassius.
names, which you couldn't even understand in the movie at times, the way they just kind of mumbled them in there. Acacius. Yeah, I wasn't sure if those
Cassius.
two were gonna team up. So there was a lot of, in that sense, it had that Game of Thrones, I don't know who's gonna make it out of this movie vibe, which I actually enjoyed, but something I kept coming back to, and it's something that for me, if anything, sparked the desire for a sequel, was Mr. Hunsu's performance in the first one. Maximus is like almost partner in crime through all these gladiatorial trials where he makes it out of there, and he's got those lines that you mentioned at the end of Gladiator, where you're like, okay, there's actually room for a sequel here. They should have brought his ass back.
Yeah.
So that's something that nobody's talked about in any one of these reviews, is that was the room for the sequel there. And the fact that he's just kind of doesn't exist is, I think actually a big missed opportunity.
I feel like they should have found a way to bring back Jaimin Hanshu's character in some way, shape, or
Yes.
form. I don't know how you'd have done it and how it would have made sense, but I
He
feel
could have been a
like
Proximo,
he could have been a
like maybe
Proximo type
Denzel's
person.
rival or something.
That would have been interesting, and having that connection to Maximus's father would have been a nice turn, I thought. And it's weird because sometimes I feel like Ridley Scott is wanting to simultaneously embrace the legacy of the first Gladiator and Gladiator 2, and also distance himself from Gladiator with Gladiator 2. And it's this weird push pull thing that I think kind of, in some ways, negatively impacts the movie. But I agree with 100% with you. We don't get a character. The closest character we have to Jaimin Hanchu's character in Gladiator for Lucius is Ravi, who played by Alexander Karim, who's that former gladiator from India who earned his freedom and then he chose to become a doctor. I loved those scenes together. I
Yeah.
thought they had great chemistry. I almost wanted more of that. I wanted more of an investment between the two of them when it comes to that situation, because you really got the sense of that relationship budding and blossoming. And I think he's eventually the one that rides out and grabs General Acacius's people to
Yeah.
come back with. I really dug that aspect and that little wrinkle to it.
Yeah, I
What?
liked him, and I liked and I'm looking his name up now, Peter Mensa, who's got a very distinct look, Ghanaian English uh ethnicity, probably best known as the guy from 300 who Gerard Butler kicks into that hole
Yep.
before he says, "This is Sparta."
This is
Um,
madness.
this is he who was also in Tears of the Sun. Great, just has a great look to him,
Yeah.
right? I thought he was going to be one of those guys who's kind of riding with Lucius throughout the first film, and
Nope.
then he
And
gets absolutely devoured by the monkeys.
he just lays down and dies.
Yeah, which was kind of a weird, like, what are they doing here? I thought really that he was going to be kind of the Digimon Hansu character from the first one, and then he's done, he's toast. So two good characters there that I think I mentioned earlier, after when we actually not earlier last week when we saw the film, where I think it's going to have some of that kind of heat longevity, where we're actually going to kind of go back to this in a weird way, because we're going to get a kick out of some of the characters and some of the chemistry between different sets of characters.
Yeah, and again, I do appreciate the kind of Machiavellian manipulations that go on the scheming and the backstabbing
Yeah.
of the Senate and the manipulations of people like Macronus. But again, I think it pales in comparison to what we received in the first film, because I thought that was much more interesting, the byplay and the
Yeah.
are we going to get Maximus free? Are we this, and then the senators get captured and then his men get killed. That's again, this in some ways feels like a pale facsimile. And
Another
I
weird
feel
move,
like
Derek Jacobi, like legendary, not legendary, but he's a popular Shakespearean actor, English actor. And then he just gets like a couple scenes and he's like, oh, this guy's back. And he doesn't
yep.
look 2
And
years
then
older than he did
and
25
then
years ago. And then he gets offed.
yeah, it's
Like,
like, hey,
what?
it's like, hey, who is this? It's like, hey, remember Senator Gracchus? Well, bye bye. It's kind of there's a couple times that there's some member berries in this movie that I went, what are we doing here? And I feel like
Yeah.
I've spent the last hour shitting on this film, and it's like some terrible, awful thing. Like, listen, it's not. It's a good film. I was entertained. I liked
Same.
it for the most part. It's a strong 7 out of 10. But again, I don't think it necessarily justifies its own existence, and I don't really feel compelled to rewatch it in the future. I was hoping this is one of the films that I'd walk out and be like, okay, well, this is a first day buy for me when this comes out on 4K, and it's not. And we've really have to. One of the things that we haven't addressed that we have to talk about is I love Pedro Pascal. I love that he's blowing up. I have loved this guy since he played Oberon Martel. I think he is fantastic
I know
as
where you're going. I
as
already agree.
as Joel in The Last of Us. I have tremendous respect for his talent and his ability. He felt like he was sleepwalking through this role and just like reading lines. There's nothing. The best line he had that's in the film is the one that we see in the trailer about I'll not sacrifice another generation based on their vanity. But I never. He just was not compelling at all, and you need to have
No.
that character be compelling, because he is the source of Lucius's enmity for most of this film, because he had attacked and killed he attacked his home, killed his wife.
There's something about Pedro Pascal that I can't articulate. I've been in love with this dude since The Prince of Dorne, right?
Yeah.
Since season 4, Game of
Yep.
Thrones. I'm absolutely one of my all-time favorite characters in any show. And from that, I was like, I'm riding with this guy forever. I love this actor. But he's one of the most likable actors. And there's a certain, put it this way, maybe this is the way to put it. I feel like he's one of those guys who in real life has a lot more gravitas than comes across on screen. Maybe that's the best way to put it, where on paper, he's got all the elements and all the ingredients of what someone who has charisma should have. Yet, for whatever reason, a lot of that charisma doesn't seem to come across on screen, which then begs the question, does he have charisma to begin with? Or is it just this likable guy that he has that like look that it looks like he should be dashing, but he isn't. He was in Game of Thrones, could have been in a lot of other stuff. Love him in Last of Us.
He's great, and he has a nice comedic turn, because he's
Yeah.
great in the I think it's the something, the one where he was with Nick Cage, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Funny as hell.
Yeah. And even in I like him. What's the drug show?
Oh,
The
Narcos, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Narcos. But for whatever, and maybe it has something to do, and this kind of goes back to the Mandalorian too. There's something about his voice where it's almost so even keeled that it doesn't do anything,
Hmm.
right? And acting, half of it is the voice.
Hmm.
Like we talked about Paul Mescal, it's when he spoke is when he kind of came alive. Nothing about his voice or anything. Pascal here, very wet fart realm here. I was
I
very
think
disappointed.
that was the
And I hate
biggest
to say it because I
surprise.
love the guy.
Yeah, same. And listen, I fully think that he's going to crush many, many roles in the
Yeah.
future for many, many decades. I think he's probably going to be a fantastic Mr. Fantastic
Yeah.
Reed when Fantastic Four comes out next year. I have no doubt about that. This one I think was the biggest surprise and disappointment because if you had told me before I went in that, hey, one of the weakest parts of Gladiator 2 is going to be Pedro Pascal's performance as General Acacius, I would have laughed in your face. I wouldn't have thought that that was the case at all, and yet it is what it is.
I'm blaming Ridley Scott. Maybe it's a case of, look, we have to set him up almost as the antagonist, right? He's the fuel for Lucius's fire. Yet we also have to respect him. There's then we got to do the whole like coup attempt, which gets snuffed out. That whole thing, which was interesting. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe there's just too much character in this movie. There's just a lot of moving parts,
Hmm.
and he just kind of gets swallowed up by that. I don't know. I didn't really know what they were. I did like the scene between. I got to say, the fight scene between him and Lucius, the hand to
Yes,
hand
that
fight.
was
I
great.
really felt like each one of those blows, and it was to the point where it's like, shit, I don't know who's going to come out of this fight alive.
Yeah, the fight choreography in this film in Gladiator 2 is second to none. I want to
Yeah.
give credit where that is. The fight choreography, the fight, whether it's the opening battle, those ones in the arena, as you said, the one between uh, Acacius and Lucius is as good as build in this
So
game.
authentic, I had to wipe my hands of dirt
And sweat, right?
watching these.
Again, same thing with the costumes and the set design and all that stuff is top notch when it comes to this case. The one and again, I also have to give proper credit where it's due. John Matheson's cinematography. He did the original Gladiator. He's done Kingdom of Heaven. He's done X-Men First Class. He's been an excellent
Yeah, he's great.
cinematographer, director of photography for decades now. Same thing here. He knocks it out of the park. The shots, the visuals, imagery in this film has a distinct feel to it that draws you back into Gladiator from the jump. You feel like you're immersed in ancient Rome. And
Wonderful on the big screen.
wonderful on the yeah, I would say this is definitely worth seeing on the big screen. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. It's this type of movie you want to see. And despite what we've said, I think at 87 years old, Ridley Scott directs the hell out of this film. The
Yeah.
fact that you can be 87 and direct a movie that is this, momentous and has such vim and vigor and vitality and energy, kinetic energy going to it is pretty impressive to me. The direction, I don't blame really Scott. I don't think the direction is anywhere lacking here. It's just necessarily the script and the vision and what we were trying to accomplish doesn't quite work. And I have to say, as much as I love Harry Gregson Williams as a composer, I was really missing Hans Zimmer. I really would have hoped they would have got Hans Zimmer back because Gladiator, the first Gladiator, has one of the most memorable scores of all time because it's
Ah,
Hans Zimmer.
beautiful.
But I didn't really feel that with Gladiator too.
Yeah, I give credit to I thought the sound design was good, especially with the
Yes.
battles. And there's a lot going on there that you have to. That's one of those things that we always, not always, but I think it's kind of just forgotten almost. Like it's not appreciated enough as the sound design in a movie where you have war and battles and you have to, think about all that, right? There's a lot you have to get right. And the sound design was fantastic in my opinion. But yeah, the music in terms of score, I was never really wrapped up. There was a couple like goosebump moments, but that was more the moment than it was like the music. Where in the
Yeah.
first one, it was the moment and the music, and it's that classic tale of when that marriage happens. That's the magic of cinema, and I
Yeah.
didn't get really any of that here.
It's
Though when it did work, there was a lot of those melodies and like flourishes that were from the original, like that
mhm,
Maximus theme or whatever they call it.
right.
Like that was littered throughout subtly, but it was there. But any other kind of score, you could play it right now, and I couldn't tell you whether or not it was in that movie.
Yeah. I mean, because that's the thing is that one of the things about the score is there were several, especially with the first film, is there's several goosebump in trying to think, inducing moments that I still get goosebumps when the music is paired against when Russell Crowe says, "I will win the crowd. I will give them something they've never seen before," or that scene where Commodus is basically saying, "I will strike down all of your." all of your kin unless you tell me everything. Those are the moments that stick with me and that are goosebump inducing. And I was really hoping to get some of that in Gladiator 2, and unfortunately did not.
Yeah, it was almost like the first one. You're like, can he get there? Can he get back to where he needs to go? How is he going to? How is he going to get up close to Commodus to solve this whole thing? How is he going to? How are they not going to just? Why can't at any point Commodus just kill him? Which they get into, right? Because then the people revolt, and then he's going to become a martyr, all that stuff. So
Right.
that becomes its own game. For this one, it's almost like you're just waiting to see what the hell happens with all these characters. It's a complete different mindset when you're watching the two films. I think that's big too. Speaking of Maximus, so it's weird because I would say most of the film, you get a couple small references to Maximus. And then all of a sudden, the last like third of the film, it seems like there's 78
Everywhere.
references to Maximus. Yeah, there we see the shit hanging on the wall. Ravi shows them like, the grave site there with his stuff. And then all of a sudden, it seems like everybody remembers him. Uh, how do you think Ridley parlayed that? Did he
I
overdo it? Did he
think he
underplay it?
I
Did he
think
not
he
know what the hell he was doing?
I think he overplayed it. I think it felt a little shoehorned and not
Yeah,
natural. And
right.
there was a couple elements about it that really rubbed me the wrong way because I felt he dropped the ball on little things that he should not have. First of all, what we do in life echoes in eternity is on the wall in English, when through the rest of the film you've seen almost everything on walls in Latin. So that took me out of it. I'm like, what? What are you doing? Because, you know, all you have to do is have Lucius read it in Latin and then say, what we do in
What does
life
it?
echoes in
Somebody
truth.
says, "Hey, what does it say?"
Yeah,
Or how
something
would
like
you? And then all, and you're like,
and
"Oh."
and then okay,
Well, first of all, let me hop on that really quick. I mean, we all loved it. It was like a personal moment when he says it. Is that really something that like somebody's going to remember and they're going to throw on? You know what I mean? He says it like one time.
yeah.
I don't know. That felt weird to me. It was almost like, "Hey, remember it was in the first movie? Let's include it."
Also, you're gonna take his armor and a sword that hasn't been used in 16 years and is probably pretty dull, but I'm going to go out there and fight the most major important battle that I've been gearing towards the whole time. It's those little things, and we talk about Robert Byron Burnett, who I follow, is a big guy about verisimilitude or the idea of things feeling real. That that there's investment they can buy, and those little things like that that took me out of the movie. Of that
Even
along with the baboons and situations like that.
right. Yeah, there was even a moment where, and we saw it in the trailer, and I actually like it in theory, where Lucius, he gets down on like one knee, he grabs the sand, he's like readying his hands, right?
Hmm.
Same thing that Maximus did. What took me out of it just a touch was when Connie Nielsen's character kind of sees that and is almost like, oh,
Yeah.
could that be Lucius? Like, get the
Is it
fuck out of
her?
here. I'm sure everybody does that. The same way every basketball player, like,
Pulls a LeBron?
well, it does the thing where like you rub the bottom of your sneakers to get that like sweat off and to get a little bit of that
Oh,
grit on your hands. I mean, it's such a cliche thing. You wouldn't see it and go, ah, he must have watched, Larry Bird in '88. It would
right.
just be like a thing that most gladiators probably do. And it just felt a little too like, hey guys, it's another Maximus reference.
Mhm.
So that would kind of bother me.
And I really so here's the thing that I wanna talk about because as much as I love Ridley Scott as a director, if you look at like the last 10 years of his career, there's definitely been more misses than hits. I mean, The
Yeah.
Martian, Alien Covenant, and The Last Duel are all excellent films. I love them all. The Martian, to me, again, is a masterpiece. I think Alien Covenant is severely underrated, and I love The Last Duel, and like nobody saw that film. But some of the stuff, like All the Money in the World, House of Gucci, Napoleon, Exodus, Gods and Kings, The Counselor, there's some massive misses there. And that's the thing about Ridley Scott to me is like I never know sometimes what Ridley I'm gonna get when the next film hits. Uh And you hope for a Gladiator, you hope for a Blade Runner, you hope for an Alien, and it's not always the case. And I think it's because he set the bar so high. He's one of the great directors of the last 50 years that when things aren't masterful, you almost feel like you're being let down as a cinema goer. And I'm not trying to shit on Ridley Scott. I'm
No, I
really
know what you're
not.
saying.
I
I
just
agree.
I just know what the levels of greatness that he's capable of, and I was just hoping with Gladiator 2, and I didn't get it.
Yeah, and the weird thing about Gladiator 2 is maybe this is probably a little bit of a reach, but I almost feel like if this was like a first-time director and we weren't super familiar with the first one, and this was just kind of like a standalone film, Maximus references aside, we would go, "Holy shit. Who the heck put this one together?" Like,
Mm,
this is interesting. It's clunky, but there's a lot of like big swings in this movie.
right.
Wow, they really got Denzel cooking and Paul Mescal really bringing him out of his element a little bit here,
Yeah.
right? Like he's not just the heartthrob like emo type movies. This is him like kind of coming into his own a little bit. Wow, who's the
Oh, wow.
director that got some of these personalities?
Yeah.
We would be like, holy shit, who is this new scribe? Who's this new guy behind the mask here? Right? But now it's like, oh, it's Ridley Scott. Well, shit, man, this thing could have been a hell of a lot better. In that sense, weirdly, I would almost not be surprised if he did somehow get nominated
He
for best director, which is weird
That would be
because
interesting.
this is like his 14th best film.
Yeah, exactly. Here's where I would push back against that idea is that I never thought about Ridley Scott the entire time I was watching Gladiator 2 at
I
all.
constantly kept thinking, how the hell does this old guy get out of bed and say, you know what, I want to make this particular scene? But I know
Yeah.
what you mean. I know what you mean. It didn't harken back to his usual footprint and
Mhm.
such.
Agreed.
What other table scraps you got here? What did we miss? How about the interesting senators? The one guy who was really parlayed his debt to Macronus into a little bit of a, hey, heads up, there's a coup coming your way.
Yeah, it was an interesting commentary on how people are corrupted sometimes. I don't want to say by necessity, but because they have no other choice, because
Yeah.
they're backed into a corner due to, owing a ton of film. And you got the sense that that senator and Macronus had history together, like possibly sexual history together, in this case.
Yeah,
But
there's a little bit of
it's
that.
that's the one thing that I did respect about Denzel's character as Macronus. He was kind of playing the long game. He was looking for his momentum, building trust and money and men where he could, and then waiting for the right time to pounce. It just didn't work out for him. But overall, I'll say this definitive overall is definitively as a film, and I've kind of mentioned this before, but it bears repeating now, as the song says. It's about it to me. It's a strong 7 out of 10. It was engaging. It was it was interesting to watch. I had fun with it. The action scenes were great. The set pieces, the design, the design, the costumes, all that stuff was good. I just was really missing the heart that I got from the first film, and honestly, it's kind of a pale imitation when you stack this next to the greatness of the first Gladiator.
I hope it doesn't ruin now when I watch that first one. Am I going to be thinking too much of the second now?
Mm,
That's what I hope doesn't happen. Even though I think I'm usually able to watch a film in a vacuum, I
mhm,
hope it's not tainted per se.
right. I don't think it will be. I watched Gladiator right before we watched Gladiator 2, and I don't
Ah,
feel, and for me, it doesn't in any way negatively impact the original in my mind.
now for the Leo McKern Award, named for the lovable drunk imperious from 1985's Lady Hawk. This award goes to the character we would most like to have as a neighbor, Corey Cook. Who'd you like in Gladiator 2?
The guy I would go with for is Alexander Cream's character of Ravi, the gladiator turned doctor. I think that was such a novel, interesting concept of a person who was a gladiator who earned his freedom and then decided to stay as a doctor to treat wounded combatants. And I really liked. He's one of those. He was a kind of a character that I could obviously I would love to have him as a neighbor for doctor tips if I happen to get into a scrape. He could
Hmm.
patch me up, but also he's a character that I saw and I was like, I would like to watch maybe not a movie about him, but maybe like a 1 hour television offshoot episode about the Ravi character and his past.
Everything you said about him, I'm going to say about my choice, and that's going to be a character who doesn't really have a name other than Master of Ceremonies. The guy
Ah,
who, kind of an odd looking dude,
yes.
bald head, a lot of costume, almost like trans vibes, like what's it, cross dresser
He was
vibes,
in Doctor Who.
announcing. Yeah, and oh, he is in Doctor Who.
He's been in Doctor Who before, yeah, and a lot of
Matt
other
Lucas is
English
is
shows.
the name of
Yes.
the actor. But yeah, I thought he was pretty entertaining. Every time he popped up on screen, I'm like, all right, somebody stick an arrow into this guy's throat. But really, it was I was curious to see what he was going to say in each one of his probably 5 or 6 appearances. Would love to have that kind of pomp and circumstance of a person living next door. So I'm gonna take a left field throw to home here and go with the MC for my choice.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time once again for Luke and Corey's recommendations. This can be anything, can be books, can be movies, can be music, can be a song, a dance, a joke, a sunset, a sunrise. Anything and everything is up for grabs. Mr. Luke Mayo, what are some of your recommendations this month?
My first recommendation is going to be a post-apocalyptic novel, which I'm reading only because I know they're going to be making it into a movie. Ridley Scott, Paul Mescal. It's called The Dog Stars. Was written in 2012. I'm about halfway through it. Set in Colorado. Dude and his dog, and a kind of like a right wing survivalist nut. They're kind of like patrolling this area, and it's after this what sounds like a flu or a plague has kind of ripped through humanity. At some point in the novel, this is something that they mention in the back of the book, and that you'll see if you read anything about this being made into a movie. Is that at one point, the star of the book hears a call over the radio and responds to this call. So I don't know if it's going to be somebody asking for help, somebody who's in a community nearby. You're not really sure how much of humanity is left, but it's a book that is kind of makes you appreciate life, humanity, that human connection. And so far, it's kind of a slow burn. Has kind of a feel of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and right now it's really starting to kind of heat up halfway through. So I'm curious to see where this goes. I think it's one of those books that right away you're thinking, okay, it's a good book. I think it could be a great movie, even though it's not a great book yet. So I recommend The Dog Stars 2012 novel.
That sounds like a profound novel that I definitely will have to check out. It makes my first recommendation look like dog shit because I'm gonna recommend a portable ironing mat. I ordered this offline, $15. You can take it. It has magnetic clips. You put it on the top of your washing machine, and then you can iron your clothes on top. So you don't have to worry about some gigantic, clunky ironing board. You can just have it right there. I use it at least twice a week. It's fantastic. I love it. Can't recommend it enough. Portable ironing mat. You can find it on Amazon.
That sounds cool, actually. It's a good Christmas gift idea for somebody. My second recommendation is another book, this time nonfiction. This is one of those books that has no business being this good, but it's one of those every page there's a couple holy shit facts or anecdotes. The writer is writing his ass off. Henry Grabar. The book, Paved Paradise: How Parking Explains the World. If you like any kind of community planning, urbanization, that type of thing, especially here in America, it's super fascinating. I think it was written just a few years ago. The second chapter, one of the best chapters I've read in a long time, about fighting over parking spaces,
Hmm,
is there's some laugh out loud funny moments. This is my second recommendation. Order it on Amazon yesterday.
nice. My second recommendation is going to be I stated this before, but one of my goals this year as a cinemaphile was to get outside my comfort zone and watch some of the classics that I've never had a chance to sit down and watch. So these next two recommendations are actually going to be in that category, but I'll go with my first one, which is my recommendation of 12 Angry Men, Sidley Lumet's first film back
Ah,
in 1957,
love
starring
it.
Henry Fonda, Lee J. Cobb, Ed Begley, Jack Warden, all about the murder trial of a young Hispanic man that seems to be on the outset an open and shut case until these 12 men start to actually discuss the case. Their own prejudices come out, and it's just an interesting look at the judicial system and how we're afforded a unique opportunity to participate in the process. Just a great, vibrant drama that really just builds to a climax. And amazing to think that the movie as a whole, is pretty much set only in one room. I mean, there's also like the bathroom and a
Yeah.
little bit outside the courthouse and a little bit inside the courtroom itself, but it's mostly in just that one room. And it's literally one of the, continuously heralded as one of the greatest films ever made. So can't recommend that enough. Watch 12 Angry Men. It's dynamite.
I always enjoyed the remake of it too, which I think was a made for TV
It
movie.
was. I
George
haven't
C.
seen it.
Scott, Tony Danza. That was actually
Yeah.
the version I watched in high school
Hmm.
in English class or one of those class, probably history. And then I went back and watched the black and white one. I was like, oh, this is actually the better version than the newer one. So yeah, awesome recommendation. My next recommendation is I almost feel guilty recommending it because I bitch all the time about movies with too much CGI, and this movie had too much CGI, but it was a fun family film that we saw yesterday. Red One. I know, folks,
Oh,
you're going to be sending bags of shit on fire to my doorstep, but we actually enjoyed the movie with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, Chris Evans, and of course, J.K. Simmons as Santa Claus himself. There had some funny moments with Chris Evans. I mean, he was really good in this. The Rock kind of played it straight. Some other good character actors in there. The guy that plays Tormund in Game of Thrones, Bonnie Hunt is in there. Mary Elizabeth Ellis, a couple other folks, recognizable names, Lucy Liu. But yeah, it had some heart. It was a good family Christmas movie. We're still looking for one that is going to be one of those rewatchable ones every year. I don't know if this is necessarily going to be it, but I could see myself watching it next year again. Red One, I think it's worth checking out, especially if you got kids.
mhm. All right. My next recommendation, as I said, is going to be another one of the great classic films that one of the things I got into this year was starting to watch more Akira Kurosawa films, and this time I watched one of his modernized films, I guess you could say at the time, which was High and Low, 1963 film, starring, of course, as always for his movies, the great Toshiro Mifune as a wealthy executive in Japan who's in the struggle to gain a control over a company. And what happens is he's trying to make this power play move, but a kidnapper decides to kidnap his child and hold him for ransom. However, he kidnaps the wrong kid. He kidnaps his son's best friend, who happens to be the son of his chauffeur. And then it just starts to be this morality play of he if he pays the ransom, he's going to ruin himself financially. But does he that but can as a human being, can he allow this kid to possibly be killed, and this and that and the other thing? And then it kind of at the back half becomes this really interesting police procedural of how the cops actually try to end up getting and capturing the kidnapper himself. It's really fascinating. It's almost the way I see it in terms of how it turns, but it's still like two halves of a really good film that becomes a great film. Is almost like how Apocalyptico kind of turns like halfway into this almost like chase film.
Yes.
It's kind of like that in terms of tonal shift,
Ah,
which I still, but it still is very cohesive, and it's still considered one of Kurosawa's best films. I really do recommend it. It's actually streaming on Max right now, as a bunch of his films are. So again, I'll recommend it again. High and Low by director Kira Kurosawa.
I'm out of recommendations.
All right, I got three left to go. I've got the next book is one I just started, recommended to me by a great friend of the pod, Mike Pagano. The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. Just really is. I'll read the title whole because it's kind of sums up the book more. It says, "The Comfort Crisis: Embrace discomfort to reclaim your wild, happy, healthy self." And it's basically this. The author is somebody who he wrote for like a health magazine, but he was kind of living a double life because he was an alcoholic, and he just nothing in his life felt fulfilling. And this book is all about stepping outside of your comfort zone in an area where we have, cell phones and things like that. So it's him starting off on like this 30-day journey in the Alaskan outback. So it's really intriguing. Highly recommended. I just started into it, but it's really good. The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. My next recommendation is I did get a chance to go to Chicago a couple weeks ago with also Mike Pagano as we went and saw our friend Andy's son play in one of his final college football games. And one of the things we did, we're going to hit Chi-Town. We got to hit some good food spots. And I had a Chicago dog, and we also went to Deep Dish Pizza. But the best place I went to was a place called Buono Beef, which is what the Bears restaurant is based off of. The show The Bear, the original, like the beef, I think is what they call it at the original where he works at the restaurant. Oh my God, so good. The beef sandwich
Making me hungry
is
here.
amazing. You can craft it to the way that you want in terms of like scooping out the bread so you can put more meat in, dipping the whole thing in. They had these you can do extra crispy fries. Like there's a way to order this thing. And also, I cannot stress this enough, they do specialty milkshakes, and they had a pumpkin spice one. And I swear to God, Luke, it's like they took a slice of pumpkin pie, put it in the shake, and made it into a shake. It was one of the best shakes I've ever had. If you are a pumpkin pie fan, you would love this. So that's my recommendation. Buono Beef in Chicago, several outlets for
I'm
that.
starving now.
And lastly, my final recommendation is, I'm a big fan of Bill Hader. Loved his time on Saturday Night Live. Did some great impersonations.
Just
If
watch
you
him in Noel.
if you get a chance, look up on YouTube Bill Hader puppet. There's a couple skits he did where he had this character who was a messed up war vet with PTSD from Grenada, and he was basically created. He was in like a puppet creation thing where other people created puppets that are also normal, and his is like insane. It's like, okay, we the message came down from top brass. We sprayed liquid death across the village, like all this. It's hilarious. And there's a part where like he's smoking, but the smoke ends up coming out of the puppets, which was just it's hysterical. Like I was in tears
I've
laughing.
always liked his mind, his comedic
Yeah,
mind.
his comedic mind is great, especially his impersonations about stuff too. So that's my final recommendation.
Corey Cook, we're almost to the end of the year, but we're not done with movies in 2024.
So the final film we're going to do in December is one of those movies that I feel like gets lost in the pantheon of great films by Michael Mann. And it's the film that really kind of kicked off Russell Crowe being in the zeitgeist along with that and LA Confidential. And it's 1999's The Insider, based on a true story. I remember watching this film when it came out and absolutely loving it. And I'll still catch clips on YouTube every once in a while of this film. So I am so excited to revisit this one.
Same, excited to revisit. Haven't seen it in a number of years, so some great performances. Classic Michael Mann, classic Corey Cook. Good to see you again, sir. Thank you for joining us on Movie Chumps. We will see you rapscallions and asshats next time.
And remember, kids, all movie experiences are subjective. Your mileage may vary.